Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster diode wiring on a 2019 Ford Flex. Now there's 5 main components required for flat towing a vehicle, and the first one's going to be on the vehicle side, and that's going to be your base plate, and that's going to create a solid attachment point to the frame of the vehicle that allows you to hook up to your tow bar. And the tow bar is going to be the connection between the base plate on the towed vehicle and the hitch on the RV. You also have your safety cables, so just in case of an accidental disconnect, you still have an attachment point from your base plate to the hitch on the RV. You also have your braking system, which will allow you to slow and stop at the same time that your RV goes. And also you have a breakaway cable, so in case everything catastrophically fails, it'll pull the cable, putting the brakes on the vehicle and bringing it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. Now you also have your diode wiring, which is going to transmit your light signals from the RV, letting people behind you know when you have your lights on, when you're using your turn signals, or when you're braking. Now the diode wiring kit is available in a few different configurations, so if you need to pick up an umbilical because your tow bar doesn't have one already included, well, you can choose to have a straight, coiled, a hybrid, or no cable at all. You can also pick one up with a 4-pole attachment as well. Diode wiring is really beneficial for anyone that really flat tows their vehicle more than a few times a year, and that's because when you plug it into the 6-pole on your vehicle, it's going to mimic that light. And the way that it works is it ties into your factory brake light wiring with some diodes, and that way your wiring goes here, runs to the front, and when you're attached to your RV, you're going to get the same light sequence, but when you're normally driving your vehicle, it doesn't affect anything. So it sure beats having to put magnetic lights and having to carry around one more thing. Once it's installed, it's good to go. The diodes create a one-way check valve for the electric, so there's no backfeed or potential of damaging any of your factory wiring. So now that we've taken a look at it, let's see how it's installed. While you're installing your base plate, it's a great time to leave that fascia off to get the rest of your components up. It's going to make running the wires a lot easier. For our installation of diode wiring, you're going to start by essentially just tying this off to where we're going to be mounting up our 6-pole bracket. And I recommend giving yourself a little bit of extra room. It's going to make it a lot easier once you have the fascia on to be able to tie that all up into the connector. If it's short, it can get a little bit tricky. So I went ahead and routed our wires this way. Reason being is our braking system, we end up tying into it, but really the whole path, you just want to make sure that you're not going to hit anything that's moving. So right here we have our belt. I'm going to go ahead and get this zip tied down, and you can see I've just kind of done that along the frame rail here at a few points just to kind of keep that wire nice and tight. You're also going to just try to avoid anything hot like the exhaust or any moving parts like suspension or axles. Now we fed it through the frame rail here, and we made our way over here to where we tied into our braking system. You can see here where we've actually gone ahead and tied into that. Now that's something to consider as well. Depending on the braking system, some of them will tie into your diodes. So if you're going to be putting it in the engine bay, or we put this over on our passenger side, leave yourself a little bit of extra wire there as well. It's going to make it a lot easier to attach it all. Now, one side of the butt connector, we have just our normal diode wiring, and then these wires are fed from our G-force controller. We're using the Stay and Play Duo today on this vehicle, and these splice in. So this is where we made our attachment point, but on the other end, our diode wiring just continues on. So as we continue down the vehicle, I used this plastic tray where there's some lines that are protected in here. I just kind of dropped in the diode wiring here, making it nice and protected, and then as we come back, I went and fed it through this gas tank cover here. And I also peeled back our white wire all the way here. That way we can get a ground here on the chassis, but also twofold. That's going to give us some extra white wire that we can use as a jumper between our 2 taillights when we do our tail marker lights. So continuing on, we just get to this point here where you can see I split off to each side. So our yellow and brown is going to feed over to our driver's side or our left turn signal, and then our green is going to go over to the passenger side for our right turn signal. Now to get this wire passed up to the taillights, we are going to need to use a fish wire technique, and we need to remove our taillights. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and get our taillight out, and we're going to be using an 8mm socket. We'll just remove these 2 screws. There's also going to be 2 pins that go into rubber, so sometimes these can get a little bit tricky. If you need to, you can use a plastic trim tool to just kind of wedge here. Just be careful you don't, scratch your paint or crack the taillight. But a lot of times if you kind of wiggle this back and forth, you'll get a little bit of a gap and you should be able to get this popped out. I am going to use my trim panel tool here, just kind of give myself some leverage. There we go, there's 1, there's 2. So you can see this is kind of what they look like, and they just go into those spots. So now that we have this taken off, I'm going to go ahead and unplug our tail light, and we can set this aside for now. So we'll go ahead and get our wires pulled up. So I have a fish wire technique. I'm just using an airline tube. I've taped our wires to it. I also have, this is our extra white wire that I peeled back from that ground. This will be our jumper that's going to go over to the other taillight, so might as well pull this up now. So we'll just get this passed through and pull up our slack. So I've gone ahead and tested to see which wires correspond to our running lights as well as our turn and brake signal. And I found that our running lights are going to be purple and white. And then our turn signal and brake is going to be this gray with, looks like a brown stripe. So just make sure that you have these 2 wires. And I peeled back the tape, which is just insulation, just to give us a little bit more room. And I try to go further back than closer to the plug. Just makes it a little bit easier when trying to get this all back in. So we'll go ahead and cut these, and then we'll strip back both ends on both sides. Now you can pull the spade connectors off of your diodes, and we're going to just put these on each end. So I just give them a twist, and since these are kind of small gauge wires, I just bend over the end, and that way it has a little bit more to bite onto. So we'll just simply crimp these down. And I recommend kind of just giving a quick tug on each of them after you crimp it, just to make sure that your connection's solid. You don't want these coming loose over time. So we'll go ahead and get spade connectors on the remaining 3. Now you can grab your diode, and you can see there's an in arrow and an out. The out is going to go towards our plug, so just take that single one here and plug that in. We'll go ahead and take our other diode and do the same here. And just make sure they do fit in the spade connectors. Sometimes you can get it stuck in between the metal and the plastic of it, so just make sure it's snapped in. And then you're just going to take the same corresponding wire, and you can put it on either side of the diode. It does not matter. And now with these wires here, I'm going to go ahead and cut these back and strip the ends, and then we'll be able to get these crimped on as well. Now we do need to be careful here. Our brown wire is going to be our running light, and that needs to go over to the passenger. And this white wire, as I mentioned before, is going to be that jumper. So we're going to be using the yellow spade connector here. It's a larger gauge, so that way you can get both wires in. And then our yellow wire, we'll just get the standard blue spade connector. And our yellow is going to be the turn signal, which is going to be that gray and brown. So we'll just go ahead and get that plugged in. And then our yellow spade connector with our running lights is going to go to the purple and white. Now these do have a double-sided adhesive here, so you can kind of stick them together. Trying to get this a little bit as compact as possible is really nice to make sure that you have space for your taillight. Now these taillights do have a decent gap, so you should be okay. But what I'm also going to do is run the excess wires down. I can zip tie any extra, but also I'm going to run some electrical tape on the ends, and that way it's not pulling stress on these. It's going to kind of keep it nice and protected to where those wires aren't going to pull out of our spade connectors. So I routed our jumper wire over and pulled that up with our green wire, and that way we can make our connections. Now it is going to be pretty similar to what we did on the other one. Our running light is still going to be that purple and white, but our turn signal and brake light is going to be purple and orange. So just kind of go through and make sure that your green's going with that stop and turn, and the white is going with your running lights. So now at this point you can get your plug on, but if you have other flat toe components to do, you're going to want to wait until your fascia's on, because this will poke through and then you'll be able to get your plug in, and a lot of times that's going to keep it a little bit cleaner. Now I have to finish up buttoning up our braking system, so we'll come back a little bit later and I'll show you how to get your plug on. With our fascia back in place, we can now go ahead and get our 6-pole wired up. So the first thing we're going to do is take the boot off. And we're just going to slide this up the wiring. And we do have quite a bit of extra wire here, which is not a bad thing. I'm going to just cut this down, and once we get this cut down, I'm going to just split these, and then we can strip back the ends. And then we're going to take these stripped back portions and feed them into each terminal. Now there are letters that are molded into here that they're going to go to. Now a small little Phillips screw. We're going to back this out, and that's what's going to tighten those wires down. Now don't back it out all the way, because if you lose them, they can get pretty tricky to find. So I'm going to go ahead and get my wires plugged in, and then I'll show you where they all go. So our colors are going to go to the letters molded in, so just kind of follow along with me. At the top here we have TM, which is going to be our tail marker. That's our brown wire. Next we have GD, which is our ground, which is going to be our white. Our LT is going to be our yellow for left turn. And our green is going to be our right turn signal, which is going to be RT. Now, if you do have a charge line, you're going to put that in the center post. So now that we have those wired up, we're going to go ahead and get our boot placed on here. And you can put a little bit of silicone in here just to kind of protect it long term. It's kind of up to you. And then I'm going to just wrap it all with some electrical tape, kind of give it some waterproof seal at least, kind of wrap that around just to protect our wires long term. Now we're going to go ahead and attach it using some self-tapping screws. We're just going to feed it into the mounting bracket and then tighten this up. Now all that's left to do is test to make sure it works. The best way to test your diodes out is going to be to hook up your 7 to 6-way umbilical and turn on the hazards and run through the running lights, turn signals, and brake lights just to make sure that they're mimicking the same lights on the RV. You can see I have my hazards on the RV and it's mimicking that signal. So that way, when you turn your turn signal on the RV, you'll have your turn signal as well as your brake lights and running lights on your towed vehicle. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster diode wiring on a 2019 Ford Flex.